Hello and welcome to the Federal. You're watching Off the Beaten Track, a program in which we discuss one issue in a fairly in-depth manner. This year is coming to an end. In a few weeks, it will be over. It's been a fairly turbulent year as far as Indian diplomacy is concerned. I want to talk about both the short term, also the long term challenges about Indian diplomacy. And to discuss this issue, I could think of no one better than the former Foreign Secretary of the Government of India, Mr. Shyam Saran. He's also been the special envoy for the Indo-US civil nuclear, issues, which was discussed with the United States in the during the UPA years, an issue which has come up in a big way in recent weeks because of the government of India saying that setting up very deliberate, expansive targets for nuclear energy production generation in India. He's also been the special envoy on climate change, another issue on which, particularly people in Delhi and northern India keep struggling all the time. So, welcome to this program, Mr. Shyam Saran, and thank you very much for sparing your time from such a busy schedule, managing so many things. Uh, my first question is that, as I said, that this has been a fairly turbulent year. Now, as far as the way I am looking at it, that this year started on a fairly positive note because President Donald Trump assumed office in January, and then, thereafter in February, right after the swearing in, Mr. Modi, Prime Minister Narendra Modi went to the United States. Prior to that, he had gone on a visit to France also, where he met the French president, and there were significant developments on the nuclear deal, which was happening with France for a long time, but has been in suspension. As we are coming to an end of the year, we are in a state where we are still kind of assessing and analyzing what all has happened in the Indo-Russia summit at this particular time. So, would you say that this has been actually a year full of challenges and that India has fallen short on several counts?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mukhopadhyay, for inviting me to this podcast. Yes, certainly it has been a very turbulent year, but not only for India. I think it has been a turbulent year for most countries in the world. So we are not an exception in that respect. Secondly, to say that we have fallen short in terms of dealing with these challenges, perhaps that is an exaggeration. There are certainly some things that we could have done better, and we can talk about that later. But by and large, I would say that in dealing with a unexpected situation, dealing with uncertainty, many issues which perhaps have cropped up for the first time in recent years. I think we have been perhaps not in a different position from, as I said, many other countries.
Okay.
So I would take a much more balanced and perhaps a more nuanced view to say that there are areas where obviously we could have done better. But I would also say that perhaps in some respects, we have been a little more agile, a little more adept in dealing with the uncertainties that have cropped up in the recent past. So I would give a more balanced kind of a assessment. If you want to perhaps grade it, I would say not quite a C, maybe a good B.
Okay, a good B, meaning in the old systems it used to be a B plus. That is the kind of gradation system I was reminded of from the time that I was in university. A B plus was considered to be chalega. That is
reasonably okay. I mean,
reasonably okay, but an A minus or an A would have been certainly much better. But felt. There are a couple of issues which we are, very perplexing to the ordinary citizen, our viewers. Let me try to take up something which very few people have really been able to understand. Uh, the US President Donald Trump, in his second tenure, has had a different approach, especially towards India and also towards the rest of the world, as you rightly pointed out. But since we are India centric, we at the moment are more concerned about what is happening to India's diplomacy, India's foreign policy. Let us talk about it. And something very crucial about which very few people understand the intricacies, but everybody gets concerned: oil, crude oil imports from other countries. The imposition of tariffs on India, penalties being imposed, as a result of which it appears to the ordinary citizen. Just 2 days ago, one of the India's private importers of crude oil from Russia, Reliance Industries, announced that it has virtually ceased importing oil from Russia. Now, does this not appear to be some kind of a blackmailing, as most people, with whom we speak, the ordinary citizen, talk that India has got blackmailed by Trump and United States?
Oh, there is no doubt that President Trump has been following a policy of, blackmail and bullying. Again, as I said, not only with respect to India, but
Yes, sir.
many other countries, both allies as well as adversaries. So I think we have to bear in mind that we are in the current situation precisely because we have a leader of the United States, which continues to be the most powerful country in the world. It is the world's, largest economy. It is the world's most powerful military country, and therefore, what the United States does and what the leader of the United States does have an impact all across the world. And particularly on a country like India, which over the past 25 years has been used to a rising trajectory of India-US relations.
That's right.
And this relationship has been of great benefit to India in terms of giving us access, for example, to cutting-edge technologies. You are aware of the fact that technology has become the major driver of growth across the world. And therefore, having that access to the cutting edge technologies that the US has been of great benefit to us, or in terms of a broad kind of a strategic convergence between the two countries that, with respect to what the challenges which we will be facing in the future includes a rising and expansive China. So, if for our own reasons, we want to constrain the ability of China to threaten our interests, which is also the concern of the United States of America. So there are areas where this kind of strategic convergence can work to our advantage and also to the advantage of the United States of America. So I think for us, having been used to that rising trajectory, to face now a stalling of the relationship, at least in some respects, is a new situation. And I have argued that you are dealing with somebody who is bullying countries across the world, whether they are allies or they are adversaries. Now, my own view is that to deal with a bully is to withstand pressure from that bully, because the more bullying you acquires to, you set yourself up for even greater bullying in the future. Therefore, it is important for us to also draw the line that we will go this far and no further. So I think my impression is from someone outside the government that we have in fact made certain meaningful concessions with regard to the trade between the two countries, but that has not been enough from the US point of view. We are in fact, in a sense, compelled to rethink our purchase of oil from Russia. not because of any other reason, but that we are still reliant on the US dominated financial and banking system. And therefore, if our companies are cut off from that financial system, it would be very difficult for them to do global business. Therefore, there are companies in India, like, for example, Reliance that you mentioned, which has had to adjust its purchasing policy. But there are several other companies which are not exposed to this particular financial system, who are still able to make spot purchases of Russian oil, and I suspect that that will continue. The reason why we have to make that adjustment is because if you look at India-Russia trade, it is also very heavily imbalanced. That is, we purchase much more than
what they purchase from us.
So if we do that trade in rupees, for example, or in rubles, for example, they would be very difficult to settle, the financial accounts, because there will be large rupee balances which will build up in Russia, and there are not enough things that they are able to buy from India. So one of the things which they will be addressing when President Putin is here in India, I think he has already perhaps arrived, will be what is the way in which we can promote Indian exports to Russia, particularly on things like, perishables, fruits and vegetables and various other kinds of things for which there is a large demand in Russia. So it is a challenging situation. But I would say that so far, I get a sense that while we continue to value our relationship with the United States, and there are components of the relationship which continue mostly unaffected, for example, the technology partnership or the defense partnership. You are aware of the fact that we renewed the 10-year defense cooperation framework recently.
That's right.
So there are areas which we continue to have cooperation as we have had in the past. And I think it is in India's interest to continue to keep those intact to the extent that the United States does not also, try to interfere with that. But as far as the trade issue is concerned, and as far as, this purchase of oil from Russia is concerned, my own view is this is very little to do with trade. This is very little to do with oil, because after all, if you are so worried about, India buying oil from Russia and encouraging Russian aggression in Ukraine, why don't you, sanction the Chinese, who are a much larger purchaser of Russian energy? Why don't you sanction Turkey, which is a NATO ally and which is continuing to buy oil from Russia? Why don't you sanction some of the European countries which continue to buy Russian energy? Hungary is a very, very good example. You have just given Hungary a 1-year, kind of a waiver to continue buying oil from Russia. So this kind of a, double standard suggests to me that the reason behind these sanctions is more political rather than anything to do with actually trade or oil.
If you say are more political, now there is this very peculiar paradox that I find, that Trump 1.0 there was a lot of synergy between Trump, the president, and Mr. Modi, the prime minister. There was even that famous rally in Texas, where Mr. Modi said, "Ab ki baar Trump Sarkar." So there appeared to be a certain amount of great personal, bonhomie between the two of them, and also a lot of political convergence, given the kind of domestic policies that they also both of them follow. Now, even now, there is a lot of convergence or similarities in the domestic policies of the US president and also of India's ruling party, especially regarding its adversaries, its opponents, minorities in the country. There are several similarities, and not just between India and US, but also there is a gradual, to some extent, in shift in several countries that we find. Yet, despite this convergence, the approach of Donald Trump at the moment is very difficult to understand.
Yeah. Two things. One is that relations between countries are mostly determined by what their perceived national interests are.
Right.
So I don't think we should move away from that principle, because ultimately at the end of the day it is how the perception of interest there is by the leadership in India and by, say, the leadership in the United States of America. Right. Now you may have some views about how the US
right.
is today determining its national interest, but that is its national interest.
That is
now. Personal relations between the leaders of the two countries, or some ideological affinity which they may have. When there is strategic convergence between the interests of the two countries, good relations, good chemistry in the relationship between the leaders can enhance that strategic convergence. But it cannot be a substitute for strategic convergence. So the role of leaders is important, but the role of the leaders cannot supplant that perception of national interest. So currently, the way in which Trump looks at the national interests of the US, you are right, is different from the way in which Trump 1.0 looked at its interests.
Okay.
So to give you an example, with regard to, for example, Asia Pacific, or what we now call Indo-Pacific.
Right.
What was the US view during Trump 1.0? The US view, consistent with what was also the view during Biden administration or the earlier Obama administration, was that the center of gravity of the global economy, the center of gravity of power, is moving from the transatlantic now to the trans-Pacific.
Okay.
That is, this is where the action is now.
Okay.
Largely because of the emergence of China, number one, but not only China, but the emergence of also other powers like India, for example. Or the fact that this Indo-Pacific also had other important powers like Japan, like Korea, like Australia, emerging, for example, Indonesia. So the perception was that if US wants to retain its global dominance, that requires it to maintain its dominance in the Indo-Pacific, not balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. It must maintain its dominance in the Indo-Pacific. Therefore, the Indo-Pacific strategy was enunciated during Trump 1.0. It is Trump who led the revival of the Quad.
Right.
Okay? So that was the perception at that time. Now that perception seems to have shifted. So he's saying, or at least we see a lot of commentary in the US saying, look, the first order of business for us to maintain our global dominance is the Western Hemisphere, is our ability to dominate, for example, the Americas, including Latin America. You see what is happening with respect to Venezuela, for example.
Exactly.
Okay. So, or that demand for, Greenland. That
even Canada.
To the United and even even Canada. But it reflects a shift in perception of this administration that the national interest of the United States requires that we should be dominant in the Western Hemisphere. And that as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned, its salience in US calculations has diminished.
Okay.
No, there is no doubt about that. So if you look at the current posture of the United States towards China, not that they have stopped becoming adversaries, but there is a greater willingness on the part of Trump to try and settle this relationship in some manageable way so that he can focus attention on the Western Hemisphere.
Right.
Now, even if this is a tactical change, it has consequences for countries like India.
Okay.
So we should recognize the shift that is taking place. So if that shift is taking place, even if there is a strong personal chemistry between the leaders of the two countries, it cannot be a substitute for this changed, strategic, outlook on the part of the United States. This is also, by the way, reflected in his attitude towards Europe, or the attitude towards NATO. So
Right.
obviously, NATO and alliance with the European countries has diminished also in significance. He is not prepared to really backstop Europe against Russia. Why is he reaching out to Russia again and again, despite the fact that Russia is clearly the aggressor in Ukraine and is taking such a hardline stance? So I think we have to take these into consideration before we decide, what this really means for India and India-US relations.
Right.
There is a certain changed context which is important for us to understand. That is my perspective. Yeah.
You explained this particular issue very well. There was something which has come up, which I wanted to possibly discuss towards the end of our discussion. But since it has been referred to you, while discussing India's ties with the United States and the Modi-Trump equation not really working out in Trump 2.0, is this entire personalized style of diplomacy that Mr. Modi has followed right from the time that he became the Prime Minister in 2014. Hugs and embraces has been one of his basic signatures. You have worked with a Prime Minister who was completely poles apart as far as personal behavior and personal relationships were concerned. What do you think is a better strategy as far as diplomacy is concerned? The Manmohan Singh style or the Modi style?
So two things. One, we should not devalue the importance of leader relationship.
Certainly not. Indira Gandhi had very good relationships with large number of global leaders.
Sure. Yeah. So those personal relationships do matter. So I don't think we should say that Prime Minister Modi is an exception in this regard.
Right.
It is true that he may have tried to project that his relationships with very important world leaders is an asset for India. Right. In some cases, it has been an asset. In some cases, it has not quite worked. He also claimed to have very good personal chemistry with Xi Jinping. But that did not prevent, the Galwan adventure by China.
While he was here in India. Even the institutions into Arunachal Pradesh.
Yes. So what I'm saying is, in some cases, it can enhance what is already a strong relationship based on convergent interests. But there will be occasions where national interests clash to such a degree that, relationship between the leaders don't really count. But don't make too much of a distinction between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. I recall that in the time when we were negotiating the India-US nuclear deal, there were occasions where we really ran into roadblocks.
Okay.
And during those occasions, when we really came up against a wall, it was the personal intervention of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh with President Bush that enabled us in those cases to overcome the difficulties which we were facing.
Right.
So when things are, almost like at an edge, which could go this way or that way, sometimes the relationship between the leaders, the fact that Bush had great respect, to some extent even an affection for Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, that did help us in the negotiating process. I cannot deny that. He may have projected his personal relationship in a different manner from Prime Minister Modi. But perhaps, and he may not have made too much of a public public
Yes.
sort of
Spectacle
display of
as
that
display or
relationship.
spectacle of it.
But I think that personal relationship, I would say, was important.
So let's move on to the neighborhood, India's neighborhood. There is a feeling among large number of people, especially the ordinary citizens who do not really understand diplomatic matters very well, that we are facing challenges on every front. All around we have nothing but just challenges. Any direction that India looks. But let us begin with the biggest challenge. That is China. There are challenges on the military or security front, and there are challenges on the non-military and trade fronts also, be it trade or other people to people relationships, all various kinds of ties. Now, how do you look at where India stands as far as, to begin with, first, as far as the military challenge goes? We have an still unresolved border issue with China. I do not know how much headway has been made out of it. We really can't make out from the handouts which are issued by the MEA at the end of various discussions or various rounds of talks. What is your perception of this?
So I'm in the same position as you are, because we don't always get the full information about what the situation may be like. But let me say that
your perception.
But so my sense is that, for example, with the Galwan incident, the fact is that the Chinese were surprised at the speed with which and the scale at which we were able to deploy almost an equivalent number of troops on the line of actual control. I think the Chinese perception was this is a relatively low risk, low cost operation where you make some advance and facts on the ground change with minimal kind of a investment. They discovered that that is not the case, that the Indians were able to, they had improved their border infrastructure and ability to respond significantly enough to be able to forestall the Chinese from making any significant gain at the line of control. So I do believe that India has today the capability of preventing China from making any large advance across the border, but may not have the ability to actually take back what the Chinese may have already occupied. But holding the line on the line of actual control, that capability, I believe, India does have. So that is a plus point. And our ability to do that is improving day by day because this government has been investing quite a lot of resources in improving our position with border infrastructure or greater deployment of capability across the line of control. So that is the plus point. But the larger relationship between the two countries is overshadowed by the fact that the power asymmetry between the two countries is expanding rather than shrinking. So we are today facing a situation where China is 5 times more in terms of GDP than India is. So that is a very significant asymmetry. Secondly, because it is benchmarking itself with the United States of America, over the last several years, it has made substantial progress in terms of, equipping its armed forces with high-tech weapons, making certain that it has the ability, for example, to match or even overcome, the very formidable deployment of the United States in the Indo-Pacific region. So that is a reality which we have to face. And in facing that reality, we also have to take into account that there is a very close alliance between China and Pakistan. Right. We saw that, for example, very clearly during this recent Operation Sindoor, where China's weaponry was used in much more effective manner, but there is evidence that China was in fact actively assisting Pakistan with targeting information, with intelligence information, which has not been, you have not seen that kind of involvement in the past.
Right.
So we have a more troubling situation across our two borders because of that link between China and
And Pakistan.
Pakistan. Further, because of President Trump responding very positively to Pakistan, giving him credit for
Yes.
stopping the Operation Sindoor, or for nominating him for the Nobel Prize, or saying please come and make Pakistan a center for crypto currency, or we can help you with rare metals and sensitive materials. Whether that comes about or not is a different matter, but at least they have managed to get Trump quite keenly interested in what Pakistan has to offer, in addition to the fact that once again perhaps US is looking at Pakistan as a possible kind of a factor if, say, Iran becomes a major problem going forward, or
It's
if,
a
for
foothold
example,
there.
Afghanistan becomes again an issue in terms of terrorism. So there is also that particular element which brings into some kind of doubt the nature of the very strong kind of a strategic convergence which India and the US had begun to enjoy, particularly after the United States of America withdrew from Afghanistan. In looking at how we should be recrafting, reworking our foreign policy, this changed kind of a geopolitical environment, of course, has to be taken into account.
Right. Right. Moving on from there, we have for the last year and a half almost, we have had a different kind phase of relationship with Bangladesh. A different set of problems have cropped up. And most recently, it has cropped up with the demand of the current regime in Bangladesh, saying that India should send back Sheikh Hasina, given the fact that she has been found guilty of the various charges against her. What are the options in front of the Indian government at this particular time?
So one is that we should respond to the demand, for example, for the return of Sheikh Hasina, not in a prickly manner, not in an aggressive manner. We should keep the temperature low on that count. And I think the fact that we have said we have taken note of the judgment, and that the request of the Bangladesh government is on the table in a sense, that perhaps is the right response, because we cannot hand Sheikh Hasina back to this government in Bangladesh, because then her sort of killing is almost certain. So we can't really consign her to her death sentence in Bangladesh. We should not forget that during the time that she was Prime Minister of Bangladesh, India-Bangladesh relations underwent a transformation. So even today, if you look at the economic linkages between the two countries, they remain quite strong, although they have been diminished to some extent. I would acknowledge that. But essentially, the interdependency, for example, in terms of power, cooperation between the two countries, I think that has remained largely intact, because Bangladesh needs that power for its own industry. So it is not in their interest to try and diminish that. What are the alternatives? Very few alternatives available. Secondly, in terms of the practical transit facilities which exist between the two countries, those also are a benefit both to Bangladesh as well as to India. And to the extent that we can keep that going, it is in our interest, and as I think is also in the interests of Bangladesh. So there are areas where despite the swing of the pendulum, political pendulum, the swing in the economic pendulum is much less. So that imparts a degree of stability to the relationship, which would otherwise not have been the case if the economic dimension was not available.
Right.
So this is in fact also a lesson for us with respect to other other neighbors, that strong network of interdependencies is in India's interest. We should keep that in mind. Now, yes, we are not able to do very much with respect to the internal political situation in Bangladesh. And I believe, neither should we try to intervene in that rather domestic
you should
political.
Watch from outside.
Yes. So let this play itself out in Bangladesh. They have to find their own way. They will have to find their own sort of way of working out their own future. As long as they don't take actions which directly threaten India's interests, we should be patient. We should wait and see how the logic of interdependence actually, starts pushing the relationship in a more positive direction.
Right.
So patience is sometimes perhaps a not a very prominent aspect of foreign policy, but I think in this case that degree of patience is worthwhile. Opportunities may arise. So if you take the example of Sri Lanka, we had also a very fraught relationship with Sri Lanka.
Yes.
Yet, I think you must give credit to the government for acting very promptly and with great urgency when Sri Lanka was really facing a great crisis.
Right.
The economic crisis that Sri Lanka went through after that political turmoil in the country, shortage of food, shortage of fuel, shortage of fertilizers, and foreign exchange issues. India stepped in very quickly in order to provide that support, and that played a very important role, important enough that a party which actually has had a history of great hostility to India,
Towards India, yes.
Today that is the government which is actually perhaps more enthusiastic about expanding India-Sri Lanka relations than perhaps another regime may have been.
The Indian government also responded very promptly with the cyclone which affected Sri Lanka.
Quite right. So these things matter, And same thing I would say with the Maldives. India did not react in too prickly a manner, which it usually does, to very hostile kind of a posture undertaken by the current government. But you see, again, the logic of economic interdependence has, in a sense, stabilized the relationship. So I would say it is not all doom and gloom with regard to the neighborhood. But of course, we do have a problem with Pakistan. We do have a problem with Nepal, with the kind of situation which is developing in that country. And because we have an open border, we have legitimate,
concerns
sources. But here I would repeat what I keep saying all the time, that, perhaps we need to change the manner in which we look at the neighborhood. I continue to believe that we need to look at our neighborhood as an opportunity rather than as a distraction, or rather than an irritation, which is sometimes what comes through, that, we are just being snapped at the heels by our smaller neighbors. That's the wrong attitude to take to your neighborhood. Secondly, we have lost the ability of India to lead the regional integration, agenda with regard to South Asia.
Right.
So everything we are doing bilaterally, which is good enough. I do not disagree with that, but we need to have a regional focus. So we need to, for example, lead the regional connectivity agenda. not only between India and Bhutan and India and Bangladesh, but how does that fit into a larger connectivity of South Asia as a whole?
Yes,
How should
nobody
India
ever
leverage its
talks
position?
about the SARC at the moment, which have
I,
been.
so we have unsuccessfully tried to pose BIMSTEC as the alternative to SARC because Pakistan won't be there. I do not think that that is a correct approach. I'm not saying that we should not pursue BIMSTEC. It has its own logic, but not as a substitute to SARC.
That's right. That's very well put. As we start heading towards the concluding part of our discussion, there is one particular issue which has surfaced in recent weeks. Especially after the Delhi Red Fort blast. That is what it was called. Now you refer to Operation Sindoor and how India and US Trump's claims of bringing the two troops together, working out a ceasefire. Now, after the Red Fort blast, once again, there were a lot of references to the fact that after Operation Sindoor, Prime Minister Modi declared that it is a continuing operation. So there was a thought which came into the mind of several commentators that had India boxed itself into a corner by making it, necessary for the government to react all the time to any terrorist attack in the manner that it did after Pahalgam. How do you look at this entire manner in which this came up post Operation Sindoor? Another very important fact that a large number of people felt that India had in a way legitimized the Pakistani regime, which was thoroughly discredited and unpopular within the country, and even outside they did not have too many friends, globally. But it has completely reversed the entire Indian action, and the response to Pahalgam altered the entire situation, both domestically for the government as well as globally also.
So, as far as diplomacy is concerned, never lock yourself into what you are going to do in the future.
That's right.
Because the future may be very different from how you perceive it today. Yes, I would maybe not have sort of locked ourselves into the position that any provocation will invite a immediate
full response.
Because how you wish to respond, the other side should not know, in fact, how you wish to respond. So you must maintain a degree of maneuverability on these issues. And so I think we should perhaps take some lesson from what has happened. The second thing is a larger question. Larger question is foreign policy will inevitably be influenced by domestic politics, particularly as far as neighbors are concerned. But foreign policy should not become a factor in domestic politics. There is a difference in that. That is, you should not use foreign policy as a tool for
consolidating your own constituency.
So, foreign policy is to advance India's external interests. Now, if you make it into a domestic issue, what happens? If you are making a statement, you are making a statement not, in fact, to your interlocutor, foreign interlocutor, but you are talking to him, but your audience is back here in India. The whole nature of the conversation therefore changes. If you are constantly thinking about, when you are talking or negotiating with your foreign partner, you are thinking all the time about how is it going to look domestically, and whether or not you can use this to get some domestic, brownie points, then it is going to be a problem. So in case of Pakistan, I'm afraid that has become a important dimension in our policy, Pakistan policy, that we are not looking at Pakistan as yet another country that we have to deal with, a challenge that we have to tackle. Not that, if I say this about Pakistan, if I do this about Pakistan, this will give me some brownie points here domestically. Maybe this is something which has got fixed in people's mind here because of Pulwama. There's no doubt that the Pulwama, incident gave a huge amount of political boost to the ruling party.
That's right.
So maybe they have been thinking that, this is very, 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 very effective kind of a weapon for domestic politics. Let's keep playing it. I think that is not a good way of dealing with foreign policy. So you must keep foreign policy aside as something that needs to be pursued in order to advance India's national interests, in order to deal with external challenges. As I admit, domestic politics will influence your foreign policy. So I can't make a a kind of a dividing line between the two. But when I am talking to my counterpart, any external counterpart, I should not have to think how is it going to play back in India. That is not the way foreign policy must be pursued. So in terms of dealing with, for example, Pakistan, or sometimes even with Bangladesh, when we talk about illegal immigration from Bangladesh, etc., the domestic factor then becomes more permanent. That's not, from a practitioner's point of view, I don't find that a very good way of approaching foreign policy.
And I'm sure you know that you and maybe many others in the diplomatic community would have actually looked at horror at Bihar during its election campaign, when various leaders of the ruling party kept on raising the issue of infiltrators and trying to use that as a way to get some more electoral benefits for the ruling party. That must have been there. So I think what you are saying is that look out, but not with an eye on inside what is happening behind you. That's very well said.
It's not to say that illegal immigration is not a problem.
No, it is a problem, but maybe not in the exaggerated manner.
Should not, begin to impact on the relationship with your neighbor, an important and sensitive neighboring country.
One last question. Globally, I'm not talking only about Indian domestic politics, but globally there has been a greater role of religion in diplomacy. And it only makes the foreign policy and the Indian and the domestic political interests of the ruling party more intertwined. How does the diplomatic community respond to a situation like that, which also means that you have to occasionally interact with your own political leadership to try to, I do not know to what extent, I've never been with part of the foreign policy establishment, but to explain to them that everything cannot be looked at only from the domestic point of view.
Let me be realistic and say that when it's a balance between domestic politics and foreign policy, domestic politics usually wins. So it is difficult to say, why don't you go and explain to the leaders that maybe bringing this in is not such a good thing, because if there are political payoffs from pursuing a certain kind of policy, then they will probably not refrain from doing so. That is not only the case in India, by the way. It is happening, as you can see, across the world. You see that happening in the United States much more prominently, but you see this happening in Europe as well.
Yes.
These are all very mature democracies where this is happening. So I think we should also be mindful of the fact that we are facing a new kind of an ideological wave which is sweeping across the world. It may manifest itself more strongly in one country, less strongly in another country, but it is a wave that is very much the reality today. So with regard to the role of religion, or the ideological factor, you mentioned the ideological affinity, for example, between Trump's America and Prime Minister Modi's India. To some extent, that is real. I mean, you have the International Conservative, Union, and
yes.
right-wing parties from across the world associate with that, because they see a certain kind of a commonality of interest. Now, there is not much that you can do in order to forestall this. But at this moment in history, I think what is very important is that an alternative narrative, which is more secular in its orientation, which is more in, recognizes the universality of some values. For example, with respect to human rights, that it is not just a Western construct. It is something which has a relevance and has a kind of a value across societies. This alternative narrative, to my mind, must be kept alive,
Yes.
even while this is the dominant phase
One.
today. So this is something that we have to think about. I mean, those of us who do not agree with a very narrowly nationalistic or a very narrowly religious kind of an approach, we have to also therefore do a lot
Have
of
an
work in
alternative.
keeping an alternative narrative alive as well. So this is something also that we need to study. I think political scientists, others need to study why this is happening. What are the roots and drivers of this ideological way? Because I think there is some kind of a sense of frustration. There is this kind of a bewilderment about why this is happening. But I mean, there are reasons why it has been happening. And unless you understand those drivers, unless you try and make certain that you have, therefore, alternative narratives in place, it is very difficult to deal with this. So it is not only just an India phenomenon. And by the way, I think India is in a sense better placed for the simple reason, and this is a very strong belief that I have, that the greatest assurance of India remaining a vibrant democracy and a plural democracy is precisely its diversity. It is so diverse a country that any attempt to put a monochromatic frame over this society is
After some time, it is not going to work. It is not going to be accepted by the people.
Quite
And very well explained, sir. It's really been a delight to listen to you and understand many things which needed some kind of an explanation. You really held a hand and took us through this entire conversation. Thank you so much for joining me on this program.
Thank you.
I
Thank
hope
you for
that
inviting me.
I would be able to connect with you when we have fresh challenges and fresh issues to look at once again. Thank you once
Thank
again.
you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you. All the best.